night on the crew deck drags on longer than it does on any other deck of the riverboat, and the two of us are usually sitting together in the linen room among the stacks of fresh sheets and towels that need sorting before morning. I'm showing you how to fold a duvet cover along the crease, and you just yawn and hand me the next sheet off the pile. Half the cabins on this trip are standing empty. It's the off-season. Fewer than half the usual number of passengers were booked, and some cabins are locked up altogether. Never sold for this route since the season began, and that includes cabin 12, where according to the passenger list, nobody is staying at all. Not on a single document, not on a single booking. I clean it anyway, every morning, because that's what the rules say for unsold cabins. I go over the shelves with a cloth, check the vent, smooth the bedspread flat without a single crease, and leave, locking the door with 2 turns of the key. And by the evening round, when I come back down that corridor with the keys on my belt, the cabin looks lived in again, the bedspread rumpled along the edge, as if someone had been sitting on it and had only just got up. The glass on the little table shifted a couple of centimeters from where I always set it. The vent switched back on, though I switched it off myself that morning. Nothing goes missing, and nothing new turns up that isn't mine. There's no mess at all. I go looking for it on purpose, carefully, and I don't find any. There's only that look about it. Exactly the one a cabin has when someone's been lying down and stepped out for a couple of minutes. Along the same corridor, there are 3 more doors with the same tag and the same unsold seal, and nothing like this ever happens with them. Locked up empty in the morning, still just as empty by evening. The same flat air, the same untouched smoothness on the bedspread, exactly how I left it, without a single extra crease in the fabric. This is my 5th season working this route, and I've seen enough cabins over the years to know what they look like empty and what they look like lived in. The difference reads straight away, out of the corner of your eye, before you even work out what exactly is wrong. You ask, 12? And I nod, and go on stacking pillowcases by size, because if I start telling it in order now, we won't get the linen sorted before morning. With 12, it started later, somewhere around the middle of the trip, once the ship had settled into its usual rhythm: breakfast, locks, riverside stops, lights out, and I stopped paying attention to what was behind those locked doors. And then I noticed again, because the look of it had become too exact for an empty cabin. Over these seasons, more than one crew has passed through my hands. Deck supervisors have come and gone. There was a big refit of the whole deck once, when they moved us for a while into crew cabins at the stern. And through all of that, only 12 ever behaved as if it had a memory of its own for how an occupied cabin ought to look, and a memory sharper, at that, than most real passengers manage, who usually leave far more behind than one rumpled edge of a bedspread. There's a click overhead from the speaker, and the voice of the tannoy says exactly the same thing it says every night at this hour. Attention! For anyone still awake. Quiet hours on the decks have now begun. Please finish up your conversations and keep the corridors quiet until morning. And I stop in the middle of a word, wait for the speaker to click off again and fall silent, and then finish not the sentence I'd started, but just its last word. Until morning. Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So, about 12. At first, I honestly wasn't sure I wasn't imagining it, because the same sort of thing had happened in other locked cabins too, now in 7, now in 3 across the other side. The vent switch by the door wasn't sitting the way I'd left it, as if someone had clicked it back up after me. Though there was no one inside, and no one could have been. I checked through the gap by the door before going in, every single time in each of those cabins, and never once found anything there. Not a shadow, not a sound, not the smallest stir of a curtain. You hand me the next stack of pillowcases, saying nothing, and I finish the thought. After that, it started happening more often in 12 specifically. and in the other cabins where I'd noticed it before. The switch went back to standing exactly where I'd left it, straight down the way it should be. Within a few weeks, I'd stopped finding it anywhere at all except 12, as if whatever had been trying different doors all over the deck had narrowed down to just the one, while the strength of it stayed exactly the same. That same soft give, no dry stop at the end, not a touch stronger, not a touch weaker. It just had one single place left now. Right then, the ship dips slightly underfoot. The hull hums faintly through the bulkhead, and the tannoy clicks on again. Dear passengers, we are now entering the lock. The engines may stop briefly, and there may be a light knock of the hull against the chamber wall. Please do not go out onto the lower deck until the maneuver is complete. I go quiet, listen to the engine humming somewhere under the floor, and pick up not where I'd stopped, but a word back. The vent. The vent in 12 is on every evening now. Even though I switch it off myself every morning, the switch pushed all the way down, as far as it'll go, whatever that's even worth on this one. You don't ask again. You just slide the next stack over to yourself, and I carry on. Because I really do need to work through this with my hands right now, not just hold it in my head. I don't hear anything from behind that door. No rustle, no voice, no sound of footsteps. And through the gap under the door, I've never once seen a shadow or the smallest stir of a curtain. There's only this feeling under your finger when you take hold of the switch and click it down on your way out. It gives softer than it should, without that dry stop you feel on every other switch on the ship, as if the spring inside it wore out long ago, though the electrician swears he changed this switch at the start of the season and it's fully new on his end. By the middle of the trip, it wasn't trying any other door on the deck anymore. Not 7, not 3, not the broom cupboard next door either. Only that one cabin, only that one switch. And it clicks with exactly the same softness as the very first time I noticed the difference. Not a gram tighter, not a gram softer. I tried comparing it deliberately, by feel. First, I take hold of the switch in the broom cupboard next door, where everything's as it should be. A tight, dry click. A clear line between up and down. And then I go to 12 and take hold of its switch, with the exact same movement of the hand, the exact same push of the finger. And the difference is there straight away, as if there's a completely different mechanism under the casing. Though on paper it's the same type, the same batch, fitted along the whole deck in one go when the ship was built. The speaker comes to life again, a different voice this time, a daytime one, brighter than usual. Good morning to everyone on board. There is fog outside, the temperature is low. Please take care on the gangways and decks. I wait for it to finish, and then I start again, not from the middle of the last sentence, but from the very beginning. The switch, yes, the switch. On that last evening of the season, I clicked it down for the last time. Same as always, walked down the corridor, locked the door with 2 turns of the key, and after that, they never let me back into that cabin again. Because by the end of that season, 12 was taken off the books for good. Nobody asked me for any kind of decision. It was simply crossed off the cleaning rota with no explanation, and 2 days later, I saw a strip of paper tape crossed over the door and the lion's seal on top of it. The deck supervisor explained briefly that they'd never managed to fix the vent in that cabin, and that until the next refit, they'd decided to seal the door, and I handed in the key that same evening, along with the rest of the technical keys. Didn't complain to anyone, and didn't ask any questions, though it never once occurred to me to ask why anyone would bother fixing a vent in a cabin where, on paper, nobody had ever lived, and nobody was ever meant to. The one thing that gets to me in this whole story is that the decision was made without me, as if my part of the work in that cabin had never meant anything at all, when I'd cleaned it every morning for 5 seasons running, smoothed the bedspread without a single crease, and switched the vent off all the way down, exactly the way you're supposed to switch off working ventilation on a working ship. None of the management ever asked me what I thought about any of it, even though I'm the only one on the whole ship, if you think about it, who ever went into that cabin more than once a season. The only one who ever knew it that closely, right down to the exact angle that particular key goes into the lock. The one set apart from the rest on the ring by a strip of blue tape wound round its head. In half an hour, the restaurant on the second deck opens. Breakfast starts. That one's just about food, ordinary business for this hour. And the two of us glance up for a second at the speaker under the ceiling, and after it you ask, "Tea on?" I say, "Pour it. I'll finish this stack and sit down." The key to 12 is in the first mate's safe now, along with the rest of the technical keys. The door stays sealed for the rest of the route, and out of habit, I still walk past it every evening on my way to the linen room, and I don't see or touch the switch behind that door anymore, because there's nowhere left to see it. But my hand still remembers that give under the finger exactly the way it was the last time I clicked it. I fold the last pillowcase, set it on top of the stack, straighten the edges with my palm, and when the linen room finally goes quiet, almost down to the morning noise from the galley, I still find myself listening for a second towards the crew stairwell, to where, round the bend in the corridor, the sealed door with its strip of paper tape stands, even though I already know there's nothing to hear from there. Tomorrow, same as always, I'll do the rounds of the whole deck with my cloth and trolley, only I'll pass 12 just the once, without stopping, and touch the door handle with the tips of my fingers, just to check the seal's still in place, and that the paper tape is still unbroken along the whole seam. My watch is always the same one. The second half of the night, from the hour when the passengers are long asleep in their cabins, through to the hour before dawn, when the captain comes up to the wheelhouse himself to take the river ahead of a difficult stretch. I've been an officer for decades now, a riverman from the very start, and I've long since taught myself to explain any movement on the water with plain physics, because tired eyes on a long watch see a great deal more than the river actually shows. Our ship runs exactly the same route every season, down with the high water, past the shoal, where the current breaks up and calls for attention to both banks at once. At this hour, the wheelhouse holds only the glow of the instruments and the low light over the chart. The wheel still warm under my palm from the hands of the previous shift, and my helmsman is usually the quiet sort, busy with his own work and in no mood for talk. So I've grown used to reasoning things through with myself, out loud, without waiting on anyone else's opinion. On the left, where it belongs, runs the chain of markers, buoys, leading marks, range lights, guiding the fairway as surely as road markings guide a car through the dark, and I know that chain by heart. I can tell any light apart by its color and its flash, without so much as a glance at the chart. On the right, the bank is a different matter, dark, without a single light, because nobody has lived there, built there, or traveled there for a long time, and I've grown used to nobody looking that way, except as a formality, when you hand over the watch and report a clear horizon. Directly opposite the shoal, an old side channel runs off into the dark bank, wide once, still navigable in the days of the old pilots, but by now so silted up that on the ship's chart it was long ago struck through in plain pencil and marked at the side, "Do not enter, no water." I remember the time when local barges still went in there now and then for timber, but since then the channel has shoaled out for good. The markers were lifted, the signs taken away, and the Waterways Authority no longer has anything to do with it, because there's no sense keeping up markers where nobody sails. On the old charts, which I sometimes pull out from boredom on a long watch, this channel still carries its full name, with depths and shoals marked inside it. But on the new charts, all that's left of it is a dotted line without a single figure, as if the memory of it were being erased gradually, one detail at a time, along with each new generation of officers. Every season I pass this spot any number of times, and the channel has long since become, for me, simply a black gap in the coastline, where the searchlight beam falls if I swing it right out of habit, and beyond that there's nothing at all. No light, no shoal with shells on it, no fishing camp, because the bank there is low and boggy, and no sensible man would go in there without real need. The first time I noticed the lights there was the previous autumn, deep in the night, when the water lies especially flat, and in that kind of stillness you can see absolutely everything on the river. 2 lights on the black bank, one directly above the other, the lower one brighter, the upper one fainter, exactly the way the Waterways Authority sets up a range mark, so that a ship can hold its course along the line between the 2 lights and know it's running down the middle of the fairway. I decided straight away that it was most likely the reflection of some beacon further off in the wet leaves, because the water that evening lay unusually smooth. But I understood at once that the idea didn't hold up. A reflection trembles with the water, and these 2 lights stood perfectly still, as if planted into the bank. And out loud, I only told myself that in the morning, in daylight, there would turn out to be nothing more than an ordinary fisherman's fire, or a lantern on some stranded barge, which I'd taken tonight for something bigger out of sheer tiredness. In the morning, as soon as it grew light, and my next watch came round by the bank, I trained the binoculars specially on that spot, expecting to see a fire pit, an abandoned boat, or at least some flattened reeds. But there was decidedly nothing there. Only the same low, even bank, a drowned snag right at the water's edge, and the same nameless darkness that you don't want to look into for more than a couple of seconds by day. I put it down to the fishermen having moved off before dawn, and the raft or the boat could easily have been towed further up the channel already, out to where the binoculars couldn't reach, and I went back to my ordinary business, because who knows what a man can imagine after a long night without sleep. The lights came back, at exactly the same hour deep in the night, and again one directly above the other, the lower one brighter than the upper, just as a proper range ought to be. Only now they seemed to be looking not at the river in general, but somewhere towards the fairway, right at the line the ship's course actually runs along. But that's nothing frightening, I told myself then. All sorts of chance arrangements can line up 2 lights into a range on an empty bank, especially since the Waterways Authority sometimes puts up temporary markers that a line officer only hears about late, and I myself hadn't checked the latest notices to mariners in a while. I reported the light I'd spotted on the right bank to the duty captain, as the rules require, and I was told in reply that the markers in that channel had not been restored, and there were no plans to restore them, because there's been no water there for a long time, and none is expected. From that night on, I started noticing a pattern I didn't much care for myself. The lights in the channel don't burn on my relief officers' watches. At any rate, there's not a line about it in the ship's log. And when the wheelhouse is taken over after me by the second officer or by the captain himself, the bank on the right stays exactly as dark as it's supposed to be. They burn precisely when I'm holding the wheelhouse, and every time I see more and more clearly that the lower and the upper light are standing in line not with the river at all, but with the bow of our own ship, as if someone on the bank were adjusting their position for every turn we make, holding the range dead on us and not on the water in general. I still call it a coincidence of the instruments and tired eyes, because I don't have any other words for it, and the ship's log has no column for things like this. In the mornings, handing over the watch, I sometimes ask my relief, as if in passing, whether they'd noticed anything unusual off the right side during their shift. right there where the channel is. And every time I heard the same answer back. Dark bank, nothing special, an ordinary night. I didn't press it and didn't ask twice, because the question already sounded strange enough coming from a man with my years of service. And I never did learn how to explain what exactly I meant without it sounding like tiredness or invention. And out loud, I never raised the subject again. After that, it became quite unmistakable, and I stopped pretending to myself that it was a reflection or a campfire. However long I hold the binoculars on that spot while the helmsman has the wheel, both lights stand at half strength, as if simply keeping watch, not looking at anyone in particular. But in the very minute I take the wheel into my own hands, the lower light picks up the exact same brightness as before, not a hair stronger, while the upper one suddenly settles precisely above it, and both of them catch the line square on me, as if the channel were opening for one man alone and closing for everyone else, whoever happens to be standing beside me in the wheelhouse at that hour. The brightness itself doesn't rise by a single degree. I checked deliberately, brought out the instrument, and kept time on it. The lights burn with the same strength as on that first night. The only thing that changes is how precisely they're aimed, and they aim truer every time, until in the end, they start opening in the very second my fingers close on the wheel, not a moment sooner and not a moment later. I've never once tried turning in there, and I don't mean to try, because there's no practical reason to at all. There'll be no depth in that channel, whatever the water level. The ship would run aground within the first 100 meters, and we have one course, the one written into the ship's schedule, past the shoal, past the dark bank, past this very spot, the same every night. I pass it at full speed, keep my eyes on the fairway to the left, where they belong. And I know beforehand that on the right, those same two lights will be burning again, right above the snag, right where the Waterways Authority hasn't put up anything for a long time now. And I don't even need to turn my head anymore to know they're there. Once I did write an official request to the Waterways Authority, in detail, with coordinates and the time of each observation, and after the proper interval, I got an answer back. No marks or lights had been set up by the authority in the channel in question. The markers there had been lifted back in the previous generation of officers, and there were no plans to restore them, there being no ship channel to serve. The second time, I didn't write because there was nobody left to ask. I had the answer in hand, official, stamped, and nothing to set against it except what I see with my own eyes every night on this watch. I keep a working chart of my own, separate from the ship's chart, old, worn at the folds, where over the years I've noted things down for myself, features of the bank, the times for reaching difficult stretches, and it's on that chart, not the ship's, that I finally circled the channel in plain pencil and wrote one word beside it: no. That, I suppose, is the one thing that's actually changed in me after all this. I've taken to holding the ship a little further left than before, down the middle of the fairway, where I used to run closer to the buoy, saving a meter or so on the turn. And to the right, towards that bank, I now look for exactly as long as the watch requires, no more and no less. The lights, I'm certain, still burn there, whether I looked that way or not, burning with exactly the same strength as on that first night, because the whole matter, as far as I can tell, was never really about brightness, and never had been. And by now, I've long since settled the whole story for myself as the tiredness of a long watch, the play of light on water, and a river that shows a tired man anything at all at night if he looks at it too long and too closely. I remember that Anchorage clearly. The riverboat dropped anchor on the roads in front of the lock while it was still light, because the queue of vessels at the gates had grown long, and the captain decided not to burn the engine for nothing, and to wait it out until morning instead. Riding at anchor in the one spot where the river widens and both banks sink into darkness so completely that nothing of them can be made out anymore. Only far ahead, right at the lock's alignment marks, two motionless points of light. The lock's signal lamps, the only thing an eye could catch hold of on a night like that. No channel markers, no lights from an oncoming vessel, not even the glow of a fisherman's fire on the bank. Just black water all around, and those 2 points far ahead, as if the rest of the world had simply been taken off the map for the night. I was a very young electrician back then, my first season aboard that boat, and I'd been given a cabin right at the waterline, in the stern, the one place on the whole vessel where you could hear the river best through the thin bulkhead. The distant horn of a passing convoy, the creak of the anchor chain as the current slowly swung the boat round. I remember the helmsman more than anyone else from that crew, though we were never particularly close. He was simply one of the few who wasn't asleep or playing cards in the mess that stopover, but sat out on the stern, smoking, looking into the darkness over the side, telling me things about the river I paid no attention to at the time, and which now, years later, I can't forget a single inflection of. He wasn't young even then, had spent his whole life on the river, rarely moved from one boat to another, and listening to him that night was more pleasant than playing cards in the stuffy mess or dozing in my cabin under the drone of the generator. I never fully believed him, and didn't then either. He liked to embellish things, especially after a drink, and he'd certainly had one that evening. I saw the bottle myself, tucked under his peacoat, and his voice on such evenings grew particularly coaxing, as though he were listening to himself as much as I was. So everything he told me that night, I'm passing on now, exactly as I heard it then, as someone else's words, not as something I saw with my own eyes. He said that on the long stopovers, when the boat stood all night in one spot in the middle of the river, a boat would sometimes come alongside. An ordinary wooden boat, narrow, no motor, rowed, making for the dark side of the hull, the side where it was hardest to spot from the deck, keeping clear of the lit gangway and the band of light by the portholes. They lower the gangway, bring the people up, quiet, no fuss, like they're meeting their own, he said, dropping his voice, though there was no one else on the stern to hear, and no real reason to drop it. By his account, someone from their own crew met them, lantern in hand, and the whole thing looked so ordinary that from the side you wouldn't understand straight away that anything was happening at all. Just an ordinary night's work, like checking the mooring lines or doing the rounds of the engine room, only very late at night and without a single unnecessary word. That same night, lying in my cabin right by the waterline, I heard for the first time a sound that went on to haunt me for years afterwards. A short, dull thud against the hull, oddly muffled, as if it never passed through the cabin's air at all, but came straight through the pillow and the bulkhead, the way a wooden boat's hull knocks against iron when it's drawn in close and pressed to the plating for a second. At the time, I decided it was just a log knocking against the hull as it drifted past, turned over, and went back to sleep. Because who knew what might strike the side of a boat in the night on a river that size? The helmsman never once described the people taken aboard on those nights. Not their faces, not their clothes, not how they carried themselves on the gangway. And when I once asked him outright who they were, he only shrugged. Who's to say? I don't look too closely. My job's where we're taking her, not who we're carrying. By morning, he'd add, those people were no longer on the boat. No one had seen them in the mess or on deck, and yet the passenger count in the manifest always tallied, as if whoever had been taken on in the night had simply filled a place already taken by someone else. I'm telling this now not because I believe it. Even at the time, I brushed the helmsman's story off as the sort of tale a man who likes to embellish things prettily after a drink might tell. But because I heard the thud against the hull myself, with my own ears, many times over that season, and the sound has never left my memory, even as the story itself has all but faded from it. I pass on his words with no guarantee of any kind, but the sound is the one thing I can vouch for myself, and it seems important to me to say out loud at least what I truly heard, seeing as the only explanation I have for that sound is someone else's. Over the rest of that season, the thud came again more than once, always at night, always on long stopovers, by locks, at landings with a single free berth, on roads like that first one. And each time it was the same short, dull thud, carried as if through cotton wool, missing the cabin's air and passing straight through the metal itself, through the bulkhead by my ear, waking me just enough to catch the one thud and fall straight back to sleep without ever quite working out what it had been. I didn't connect the sound directly to the helmsman's story at the time. I just noted to myself that wherever we stopped for a long stay, that knock would sound at night without fail, once, no more, and that afterwards, nothing else disturbed my sleep until morning, as if the river touched the boat for that 1 second and drew back at once. A couple of times, hearing the sound, I got up and went out on deck, looked over the side into the darker water, and saw nothing. No boat, no lantern, no rings spreading on the water, just the ordinary dark water of a big river, calm, without a single light all the way to the horizon, except those same 2 distant points by the lock that hadn't moved since evening. I stood there a minute or two, got cold, went back to my cabin, lay down, and fell asleep again, having settled nothing for myself except that standing about peering into the dark was pointless, since whatever was going to happen happened where the eye couldn't reach. I myself never once saw a boat, or a gangway, or a man with a lantern, only heard the sound and heard the story. And between those two things there always remained a gap I simply had nothing to fill with myself. There was, however, one night different from the rest. The boat lay at anchor on the roads for almost a full day that time, longer than usual, and I, already knowing what to expect, lay listening to the bulkhead until morning. But the thud never came, not at midnight, not later, only a level, unbroken silence, far heavier than any knock, a silence that I finally drifted off into just before dawn, still waiting for nothing. There's no worse night than the one when it doesn't come where it should, the helmsman told me the next day at breakfast when I mentioned it, and it seemed to me that for the first time on the whole trip, there wasn't a trace of the smirk he usually told me such things with. The one thing I saw with my own eyes over that entire season was a gangway lowered from the side where it was darkest, on one of the later stopovers, late at night, when I'd gone out on deck for my own business, and caught it out of the corner of my eye. A wooden gangplank lowered right down to the water, and the faint light of a lantern on its bottom step, which a few seconds later swayed and went out, and the gangway rose slowly back up to the hull without a sound, as if drawn up from inside. I made out no people on it, no silhouette, no movement, only the light and the gangplank itself. And half a minute later, I heard that same thud against the hull again, only this time it came right here, on deck, under my own feet, closer than it had ever been before, short and dull, as though the boat below had knocked against the hull one last time before pulling away into the dark. I thought back to that season more than once afterwards, and not long after it, I transferred to another boat and never crossed paths with the helmsman again, though I remembered him better than many I sailed with far longer and on much calmer runs. That's just how it goes for rivermen. We went our separate ways onto different lines, exchanged a couple of letters that first year, and then stopped. Each of us taken up with his own route, his own crew, his own winter layup. Many years later, long since retired from the boats, settled in my own house, I finally tracked him down through mutual acquaintances from the old line. He turned out to be alive, well, of sound mind, living in his own town, not far from the river we'd once sailed together. And I went to see him with one single purpose: to ask whether he remembered that night on the roads the way I remembered it. He recognized me at once, was glad to see me, remembered that trip in detail. The lock, the long queue of vessels, the Anchorage where we lay for almost a full day, even remembered which captain we'd had then and how the winch had creaked hauling up the anchor. But when I carefully brought up the boat, the gangway, the people taken aboard at night, he looked at me calmly, without a trace of irritation, and shook his head. "I never told you anything like that," he said, in an even voice. "And I couldn't have told you, because I never saw or heard anything of the kind myself. None of it happened." He said it not like a man hiding something or afraid to remember, but like a man in whose memory there simply wasn't any room for that story. Calmly, matter-of-factly, exactly the way he'd once told me the story itself. We finished the tea then, which his wife had set on the table at the start of our talk, spoke a little about the river, about boats long gone from the line, about people we both remembered, and I left him that evening without ever working out which there was more of in that story: the drink and the love of embellishment he'd had back then, or my own memory, which holds onto one short sound through a bulkhead far too well for me simply to write it off as a log in the water. I haven't heard the thud against the hull since. Not that night at his house, not afterwards, but I still know exactly what it sounds like, and I know that when I tell this story on, I'll tell it in the same words as the man who now calmly insists he never told it to me at all. The service desk sits in the deepest part of the passenger deck, where there isn't a single porthole left, only a long corridor with cabin doors down one side and a staircase to the next deck down the other. And the carpet here is so thick that even the night cleaner passes by without a sound, as if she isn't really there at all. The warm light above the desk burns steady through the whole shift, never flickering. The glass display case beside me holds tomorrow's port schedule and a stack of leaflets nobody reads after midnight. And behind me, right against the wall, hangs the call panel. A row of small lights, each one answering for its own cabin, all dark together most of the time, because at night people rarely ask for anything, and when they do, it's something simple: water, ice, a wake-up call for an early morning. This is my third contract on this ship, and I still don't speak Russian. Often, months can go by without a word of it to anyone, and when the chance to talk does come along, I talk long and eager, as if I'm handing over all at once every word that's been building up quietly the whole time. In the chair across from the desk, the same passenger has been sitting for the third night running, an older man in a light jacket, not asleep, just sitting there, hands resting on the arms of the chair, looking straight ahead with a steady gaze, and I stopped asking myself why a long time ago. "Tea?" I ask him, just in case, knowing full well he won't answer, and pour myself a cup alone, because the night is long, and staying quiet, together with another person, is a good deal calmer than staying quiet alone with a carpet and a display case. The work itself isn't complicated. Taking down late requests, ordering ice for bars that closed hours ago, waking by phone the guests who need to be off early in port. But if the night runs quiet, 3 or 4 hours can pass in a row with nothing happening at all. Only the warm light, the carpet, comfortable enough to stand on for hours, and the steady breathing of the ship somewhere deep under the floor, which you feel through your feet more than you ever hear it. The corridor behind the desk runs long in both directions, the cabin doors all identical, the numbers above them lit by the same warm light as the desk, and at this late hour, nobody walks it, except now and then a steward with a trolley, or one of the guests coming back from the smoking deck, awake for their own reasons, not mine. The passenger in the chair opposite, as far as I can tell, hasn't got up once in these 3 nights, unless I stepped away for a moment and missed it, and when I came back, he'd be sitting the same way again, in the same jacket, and I decided to myself that asking after his reasons isn't my business. Everyone on this ship has their own kind of sleeplessness, and my job is simple: offer tea to whoever's near and leave a person in peace with their reasons, whatever they happen to be. The system's simple enough. If a cabin's sold, the number lights up at the desk the moment the call comes in. The guest picks up the handset, I take down the request and go myself, or call housekeeping if it can wait till morning. If a cabin isn't sold, there's no light for it on the panel at all, because there's physically nobody in there to call from. The door's locked with a key, the power's cut, housekeeping doesn't go near it until the next port of embarkation, and I can see the list of those cabins in the system just as clearly as the list of occupied ones. That's how it was my first year, and nearly all of my second, until one night, close to 4 in the morning, I saw that in the row of dark lights, half of which shouldn't be able to come on at all, one had lit up. A small, warm point of light right in the corner of the panel, exactly where the list said one of those very cabins should be. I waited a minute, thinking it was a fault in the controller, then picked up the internal line and asked politely how I could help. And all that came back was the flat quiet of an open line. Not the silence of a person deciding what to say, but the quiet of an empty connection, occupied by nothing at all, where you can't even hear a breath. So I went and checked it myself, because that's what procedure calls for. The door was locked. The handle wouldn't give. No strip of light showed under it, and nobody answered my knock. So I went back to the desk, logged the call as a false alarm, and decided not to think about it anymore, putting it down to the new system they'd installed a month before. But the light came on again. Not every night, but often enough that I stopped believing it was a fault in the controller. And one time, about 10 minutes after the call itself, an order came through, laid out exactly the way every night order is laid out. Still water, ice on the side, one more towel, the sort of ordinary request that maybe 10 living passengers make in a night. Except this one came from a cabin that the system had shown standing empty for 6 months. I picked up the tray because an order is an order and my job is to carry it out, leaving the question of who made it and why to whoever's actually meant to answer that. And I carried it down the corridor to the right door, where the carpet muffles footsteps even more than it does at the desk. Knocked as I'm supposed to, waited the required few seconds, and when nobody answered, set the tray down by the threshold, the same as I do for any guest who's asked not to be disturbed. The door stayed locked, and the cabin behind it, I know this for certain because I looked through the keyhole, was dark and empty. No shape in it, no sound from inside, no movement anywhere in the depths of it. And that's when I first thought that the trouble, probably, isn't with a guest I've never once seen, but with the service itself, which goes on working for someone who isn't really a guest anymore and, it seems, never was one. You'll probably say I should have reported it to the deck supervisor, or at least noted it in the watch log. But what would I even write? A light came on where it shouldn't? Water was received and left by the door? That's the whole of it. Every night, You look at me the same steady way, not a word in reply. And honestly, that kind of quiet suits me better than any conversation with someone who'd be asking questions in my place. A few weeks later, I noticed it wasn't confined to the one cabin anymore. That same warm point of light started showing up now at the next door along the corridor, now at one 2 doors further on, and once, close to morning, in a cabin on the other side of the deck that I'd never before connected with any of this. But the strength of the light stayed exactly the same every time. No brighter, no dimmer. It simply seemed able to be in different places, as if it were trying on the whole of that dark row, one door at a time. And never once, not once, did 2 lights burn on my panel together, however many of them came on in a shift. Towards the end of this contract, it got to the point where, in one night, the light could work its way through the whole dark row in order, from the first locked cabin to the last on the list, lingering on each one for exactly as long as it takes to pick up the handset and hear that same empty line. And then, one morning, when I was already getting ready to hand the shift over to my colleague, a light came on for the first time on the deck below, outside the whole of that row, somewhere my panel doesn't have any cabins of its own at all. Only another deck belonging to a different night administrator. And I understood then, without needing anyone to explain it, that this was never about a particular door or a particular deck, but about the service itself, which had found a way to reach somewhere it couldn't reach before, while remaining, all the while, that same one warm point of light, no louder and no more insistent than before, simply wider, and, it seemed to me then, more patient. I rang down and warned that administrator, briefly, with no explanation, that his panel might light up too, and he answered calmly, matter-of-factly, that it already had, a couple of times in the past month, and that he'd carried water and ice as well, knocked and left the tray by the door the same as I had, and after that, the 2 of us never once discussed it between ourselves in any more detail, as if we both felt no more detail was needed. I stopped going to check in the system whether a cabin was sold or not, because the answer stopped mattering a long time ago. If a light's on, I take whatever the order calls for. Usually water, sometimes ice, sometimes just another towel, and carry it down the corridor as calmly as I would for any living guest. Set the tray by the threshold, mark the call as completed on my end, and go back to the desk to wait for the next light. The decision didn't come all at once. There's no single moment I could point to and call the turning point. I just noticed one day that my hands were already reaching for the tray before my finger got anywhere near the keyboard to check the list, as if the decision had been made inside me a long time ago, without my having any say in it. I've never told anyone about it outright. Not the deck supervisor, not the colleague who comes on at dawn and finds me already composed and calm, as if the night had gone the ordinary way. And in my watch log, the entries against these calls are always empty, because there's honestly nothing to write. Order taken, order delivered. That's all you can say about it truthfully, without going into who exactly I'm serving on a given night, or whether I'm serving anyone living at all. Sometimes, having set down the tray and walking back along the same corridor, I catch myself moving more surely than I did in the first months, that my feet already know where the carpet gives a little underfoot and where it's even, and that, I think, is the one thing that's genuinely changed in me over these months. The familiar, calm confidence of someone who knows his job and does it the same way, whoever it happens to be meant for on any given night. You're still sitting here, in your chair, and in an hour or 2 I'll probably offer you tea again, knowing full well you won't answer. And somewhere down there, round the bend in the corridor, the panel, dark for now, will wait its turn and show me once more one small, warm point of light in all that darkness. And I'll get up just as evenly as I did the first time, take what's needed, and walk down that same carpet, which muffles my steps so completely I can barely hear myself, towards wherever I've been called this time. My shift doesn't get any shorter or any longer for it. It's work like any other, only with one extra item that's in none of the instructions, and the warm light above the desk keeps burning just as steadily while I wait for that familiar point to glow again in the far corner of the panel, already working out in my head whether it'll be water or ice this time, before I've even had the chance to ask the empty line. Below the main deck, the riverboat's a different vessel altogether. You've seen that yourself these 2 months now, and 2 months isn't nearly long enough to get properly used to it. No carpet runner down here, no brass rails, just painted metal, painted over in coat after coat for so many years that the spots where other men's boots wore the paint through, long before you ever set foot aboard, still show a dull shine underfoot, and the duty lighting runs off a single lamp shared between 2 decks at once, saving fuses, saving cable. And that's why the shadows between the overalls' lockers stretch longer than the passageways themselves. Right now you're standing on the lower landing of the main companionway, at the point where you can already see the way down continuing. A short flight, just the one run of steps. And you're telling me, only me, down 1 minute, there and back, because the storekeeper asked for a tin of paint to be brought right now, before the evening watch scatters and while there's still someone to sign for it, and you're already shifting your weight onto the top step, as if the matter's settled and there's nothing more to add. Hold on, I tell you. The lid on that tin seized solid. I sealed it myself 6 months back before layup, and without the proper key, you'll be at it till morning. And that key's in my locker, 3rd one along from the bulkhead. I'll fetch it in a minute. Only let me finish telling you first how these lower decks are laid out, because in a month you've learned the way from the galley to your cabin and back, and no further. And down here, it's all more tangled than it looks from above. The passages don't run the way they do on that plan they showed you in the office before the voyage. And the storeroom you're heading for isn't anywhere near where you think it is. This bulkhead here leads through to the engine room, and the one next to it into the linen store. And I rewired the cabling under the deckhead myself, last refit, when the old wiring gave out from the damp. And I don't suppose I've ever told you how I first came to sea. A lad still, ship's boy on a tug, long before you were even born. That was the first time I stood a night watch down on the lower deck alone, covering for the electrician who'd fallen ill. And I've known these spaces ever since well enough to walk them with my eyes shut. I know every creak in the plating, every note the engine makes at every different speed. And I know one more thing besides, something no watch schedule lists and no log records. Almost every night, on the metal of the companionway, this very one you're standing on right now, someone comes down. Steady, heavy footsteps, boot after boot, unhurried, as if the man's simply going about his business and knows the way by heart. And I've been hearing it for years, ever since that very first watch, and the weight of those footsteps never shifts, not a hair, no louder, no softer, sounding just the same laid up for the winter as in the thick of the season. Come off it, you say, and I hear in that exactly the same disbelief I once had listening to older men on the tug telling the same sort of thing. Only I'm not spinning you a yarn. I'm telling you what I've heard myself, many times over, standing on this very landing, and you're standing on it for the first time in your life and already itching to push on down, as if it's just another corridor the kind there are dozens of on this vessel. That flight starting right behind you, short, a single run of steps. You can see it yourself, painted bulkhead at the bottom and a door that's been blanked off, with nothing behind it at all on the ship's papers. An empty compartment, taken out of service long ago by some earlier crew, long before even that crew's time. And every night someone goes down that stairway, and not one person, not once, in all the years I've served here, has ever come back up it.
What if you start and I cut you off straight away because I know exactly where that question's headed? You want to ask, what if someone went missing? What if someone's being looked for? What if, even once a man didn't turn up for morning watch? And I answer straight away, no sense stringing it out. Nobody's ever gone missing, not once. And that's the strangest part of the whole thing. In the morning, the whole crew's accounted for. Everyone at breakfast, everyone on watch on schedule. Nobody's raising the alarm over anybody because there's nobody to raise it over. I went through this myself in my early years. Walked the corridors at night, checked who was where, and in the morning found every last one of them at his post, including the very engineer who'd gone down the night before, right in front of me. I heard his footsteps myself, knew them by the drag in his left leg, and come morning, there he was, alive and well, pouring tea in the mess, not remembering he'd got up in the night at all, though he admitted afterwards he'd slept sound through the whole shift. You're quiet now, and that's good, because next I'll tell you something I don't tell many people. It's set down quite differently in the paperwork, seemingly nothing to do with what we're talking about at all. On this vessel's documents, there's no compartment under that flight of steps at all, only a service passage, access to which is restricted by regulation. And if access is restricted, then nobody should be going down there on any errand. Not for paint, not for tools, not for anything at all. And that storekeeper of yours, the one supposedly wanting his tin right this minute, will wait perfectly well till morning, when it's lighter down there and there are people about. I'll go down with you myself if you're that set on it. Only not now, because right now, down there, someone's walking again. I can hear it this very moment, while I'm talking to you. Steady, heavy footsteps, coming down over the metal, just the way they came down yesterday and the day before. We don't talk about it among ourselves either, if I'm honest, except now and then, in the far corner of the duty room, someone drops a word about the lower flight, and the rest change the subject straight off, because saying it out loud feels almost shameful somehow, as if admitting you hear footsteps where nobody on any of the paperwork could possibly be amounts to putting your name to your own exhaustion, or under it being high time you went ashore for good. And I thought the same myself when I was younger, put it all down to a long watch and bad sleep, until I understood it wasn't just me, because that engineer heard it too, and the electrician I was standing in for back then heard it too, even if he wouldn't admit it at first. And pretty much anyone who spent enough nights running on the lower deck notices the same thing sooner or later. Only, not everyone's ready to speak of it to someone new on his very first voyage. And here I am, telling you, for some reason, standing right here at this same landing, instead of simply letting you go on down and pretending I never noticed. I'll be quick, you say all of a sudden, cutting me off mid-sentence, and you take a step down, put your foot on the first tread of the short flight, right where the light from our one lamp gives out, and I don't get a single word out in reply, because at that very second, you freeze on the spot yourself, and you're looking past me now, down, round the turn of the companionway to where there's nothing to see at all. And I watch your face change, because you finally caught the sound I've been listening to for so many years. Steady, heavy footsteps on the painted metal, boot after boot, unhurried,
coming down past the landing towards the bulkhead and the blanked-off door, and your fingers grab for the rail beside me, and you draw your foot back off that first step onto the landing where you'd been standing, and you say one short word, footsteps, quietly, almost a whisper, as if you're afraid that saying it any louder might turn them round and send them our way. And I nod at you, without taking my eyes off that same turn in the stairs. Because right now, it's better to just stand here together and listen than to argue over whether the thing exists at all, seeing as you've just satisfied yourself of it a minute ago. And right then, while the two of us stand there listening, the one thing happens that's happened to me only once in all these years, and it happens today, of all days, with you here, on your very first navigation, though I've been walking this route for a good many years myself. The footsteps, the very same as ever, the same weight, the same steady, unhurried, businesslike pace. Boot after boot, suddenly go not down, but up the very same companionway towards us. And I'll admit to you honestly, I stand there, rigid at that moment, and I can't call to mind a single thing on this river worse than that one sound. Because footsteps go down, always. That's become almost ordinary, almost part of the ship's own routine. But up? Nobody's ever once gone up. And I take you by the shoulder and draw you back a step from the edge of the landing, not saying a word yet, just so there's a little more distance between you and the companionway. And the footsteps, before they reach the top step, suddenly cut off, as if a hand had switched them off. And a second later, they're heard again from below, going down again, calmly, at the very same steady pace they'd kept the whole way down before. We stand there a little longer, both of us silent, until the footsteps below fade away completely, not stopping all at once, but simply growing quieter with every following step, as though whoever's going down is heading further off, deeper than the ship's own drawings could ever account for. And when it's gone entirely quiet, you yourself, without another word from me, step back from the edge of the landing one more pace and say you'll bring the tin of paint down in the morning when it's lighter, and the storekeeper will wait. He's not going anywhere. At the next off-season refit, I took a welding kit myself and fitted a grill with a gate across that flight of steps, painted it the same gray as the bulkheads round it, had it logged as a fire barrier, and nobody in the office argued or asked twice. I handed the key to the gate over to the watch officers, so it'd be to hand for any inspection. The footsteps haven't gone anywhere for all that. I won't lie to you. They come down just as steady every night, only now you hear them through the bars. Muffled compared to before, as if the metal's grown one more layer between you and whoever's going down. And to this day, passing by on my watch, I stop for a second to listen, to check they're still there. And they always are, exactly where they've always been. I'll tell this voyage not in the order it happened, but backwards. I'll start with the last day and end with the first, because that's how it has stayed in my memory, in layers, peeled off one after another, and I simply can't remember it any other way now. I was 25, working as a stewardess in the ship's buffet, carrying round tea and sandwiches to the lower decks, pouring compote into tin mugs, keeping count of the crockery and provisions each shift. And that voyage should have been an ordinary one for me, like dozens before it, if not for one thing I didn't even suspect meant anything at the time, and which I only understood much later, when I'd already gone back over the whole voyage again, in reverse, evening after evening, sitting at home, far from any water. Back then, in those years, I meant to go on working the line for many more seasons yet. I was used to the routine, to the changing watches, to the way the lower deck corridor hummed underfoot all day long. And not once before that voyage had it occurred to me that this routine might one day fail to let me go on the date I chose for myself. On the last day, I didn't leave at the home port, and not at the end of the season, but at an intermediate stop where the ship put in for a few hours to collect the post and part of the cargo. I took with me only one bag, the smallest one, the kind that fits under your arm, and asked for the rest of my things, the suitcase, the winter coat, the mug with the chipped rim, to be sent on later with whoever was traveling that way. And they really were sent on a month later without a single word in the note. The quayside was empty at that hour. Just a lorry by the gates and a post trolley, mailbags being unloaded. Someone from the deck crew called out to me, asked whether I was going ashore for long. I said for good, and he didn't argue, just nodded and went back to his sacks, as if he'd heard that kind of answer here before. And no one tried to keep me at that hour. No one ran for the senior stewardess. No one asked for discharge papers. Just one more person leaving the ship at an intermediate stop. An ordinary thing for a line where turnover had always been a familiar business. I took 2 days to reach the city by train, with a change, looking out the window at fields instead of water, instead of the line itself, which I'd have been sailing if I'd stayed aboard. And I never went back to the fleet, and I haven't gone to sea since. Not even as a passenger. Not once. Not for a single hour. I decided to leave that day just a few minutes before we cast off, standing at the gangway already with that same bag under my arm. And the decision wasn't sudden. It had been building in me for a long time. Only that time, I carried it through to the end for the first time. No draft, no rehearsal in my head, straight into doing it. And it was then that I felt again what I'd felt more than once already that voyage. The shiver. Steady, running through the deck under my feet. The one that doesn't come from the engines or the swell, but simply lives under the soles of your feet the whole voyage through, day after day, level and unnoticed. Felt through your feet rather than your ears, and by the end of that season, I'd grown used to it. The way you get used to the floor under your bed. And this shiver, a minute before we cast off, goes completely still, and the deck turns dead for that one moment, as if there's nothing underneath it at all. No engines, no motion, no ship itself, just planks and metal on their own. And right at the very second my hand came down on the gangway rail to go down, the shiver left so exactly together with that movement that for a moment I thought I'd imagined it. And then I understood that this time, for the first time the whole voyage, nothing at all followed the stillness in the deck to hold me aboard. No voice, no reason, no one calling my name, no order sent after me. The stop before that last one had come earlier in the voyage. Another intermediate stop, also just a few hours, at a similarly unremarkable quay, with a single lamp over the gates. And that time too, I was already standing at the gangway, with the same resolve and the same bag packed. I'd even managed to say goodbye to 2 of the girls on shift, told them I wasn't coming back. And they weren't surprised. That kind of leaving happened on our line, though not often. And again, I felt the shiver under my feet go still. Only this time, not exactly at the second I took hold of the rail, but a little earlier, while I was still walking to the gangway across the lower deck, as if I still had time left to change my mind. And I didn't understand then that this was exactly the time being taken from me. I probably wouldn't have changed my mind if not for the bus. The last one into the city, by the time I came out onto the quay, had already gone. The timetable was right there, on the board by the gates. I checked it myself, and the next wasn't until morning, and I had nowhere to spend the night ashore and nothing to spend it on. So I went back aboard under the same calm, sensible excuse any of our girls would have used in my place. Put the bag back under the bunk, went out on watch, as if nothing had happened. Earlier still, before that stop, there'd been a changeover of stewardesses, an ordinary thing on long voyages. One leaves, another is brought in. Easier to carry the buffet work between two than for one alone. The hours long, the crockery, the tea urns, the accounts for the till, cleaning out the cramped nook behind the counter before handing over the shift. I'd already written my resignation by then, short, no explanations, and had been carrying it in my apron pocket for a few days, waiting for a convenient moment to give it to the senior stewardess, not in front of everyone, in passing. And that evening, when I finally meant to hand it over, standing at the same counter where I'd poured compote hundreds of times, I felt the same shiver again, going still under my feet. Only this time it had faded noticeably earlier, about an hour before I'd even reached the gangway, while I was still washing the last of the mugs, and I put it down to tired feet, to a long shift, gave it no meaning at all. And that time I had to take the resignation back and put it away in my pocket again. The replacement who was due to be brought in on the next voyage had gone down with a fever right there in port. There was no one on the line to stand in for her, and I stayed on for one more voyage, because you simply couldn't leave the buffet with no one to run it. And my senior stewardess only shrugged and said we'd wait for the next chance. And the very first time, if you follow it all the way back, was a stop even earlier than that. Right at the start of the same voyage, when I first went to the management with talk of resigning, I was planning to go ashore to study, had been preparing for it a long while, had already gathered nearly all the papers, certificates, extracts, a reference from my previous job, kept it all in one folder, read through the list every evening in the cabin so as not to forget anything. And it was then, standing at the gangway with that conversation still on my tongue, waiting to be seen in the duty cabin by the gangway, that I noticed that shiver under my feet for the very first time. And the fact that it goes still, though I didn't know then that I'd carry that noticing with me for years, going back over it evening after evening, as I do now. It went still only briefly and very faintly that time. An hour or maybe more before, I didn't even connect one thing with the other. Put it down to the ship standing at the quay rather than underway. Who knows how a ship behaves at a stop? And that time, the talk of resigning simply never happened. The officer who signed off papers like that was on leave. No one could stand in for him on the voyage, and without his signature, the resignation went nowhere. And word came through the door that the matter would be settled next time, and the folder of papers was handed back to me untouched, and I waited. Between those stops, if I think about it in more detail, there were ordinary days with no decision to leave at all. Watch after watch, the same walk down the lower deck corridor from the buffet to the cabin and back, and in among them I sometimes felt that shiver too. Alive, steady, familiar, like the hum of an engine through someone else's wall. And I didn't think about it at all, because you only start thinking about it once it suddenly falls quiet, as if an answer to something inside you. I carried tea round the cabins, washed the crockery in the cramped nook behind the counter, handed over the till by count at the end of each shift, listened to my cabin mate talking about her own shore, about home, about how she meant to stay there for good once she got a leave that was final. And it seemed to me then that one day I'd manage the same thing, to say it out loud just as simply and leave. No explanations, no reason, since a reason always turns up ahead of me and sounds far more convincing than my own. And the very first day of that voyage, going right back to the start, was an ordinary day of boarding. I came aboard by the same gangway, with the same suitcase that would be sent after me months later, showed my pass at the gates, walked the lower deck to my cabin, laid out my things in the two-berth cabin I shared with that same cabin mate from the buffet, made up the bunk, hung my uniform on its hooks. And the whole of that day, the deck under my feet just hummed steadily, the way it hummed on every voyage before it. And I never once stopped to think back then that this hum could have any kind of stillness in it at all, or that I'd later learn to recognize that stillness faster than my own footsteps on the gangway, faster than the senior stewardess's voice calling my surname at muster. Everything I've just told you backwards begins on that very day, and beyond it, before that day, there's nothing left of this story for me. Only the deck beneath the train carriage windows, a train 2 days on the road, and fields instead of water beyond the glass, which I've never once traded back for water since, no matter how many years have passed since that voyage. The evening lounge settles into its quiet after-dinner life. Tea in glasses set in their little metal holders. The music switched off tonight as scheduled. The lights over the tables turned down low enough that you can see the dark water clearly through the window, and the odd light on the far bank. Every evening after dinner, I'm required to come out to the guests. It's part of the job. Chief officer on this riverboat, 5th season on this route, and the passengers already know a horn story is coming, because I always start the same way. I walk over to the free armchair by the window, put my hand on the back of the chair, and say the same line to the room. Something like, "You there, yes, you, by the window. Brace yourselves, this one's funny." And the room stirs a little, the way it always does. Someone's already half smiling, because this story's been told here for years now, and even the ones on their first sailing can read it off their neighbors' faces that something funny's coming. I know exactly where the room will laugh the first time. I know the pause before it. I even know which table tonight has the ones who listen closest. Usually the ones who've been aboard more than one evening, and already noticed that out there at night, you can't see a thing. No light on the bank, no vessel coming the other way, just black water clear to the horizon. And tonight, I open the routine exactly the way I always do, with the idea that a ship on the water is a polite creature. It greets every vessel it notices. By the rules, I explain to the room. 2 vessels passing on the river are required to exchange short blasts on the horn. It's like 2 people meeting in a narrow corridor, each stepping a little aside and giving a short nod so as not to collide. Only instead of a nod, we've got a horn, and instead of a corridor, the whole river. I tell them how a few years back we passed a self-propelled barge loaded with hay, and our blast was the usual short one, and the barge's skipper got so touched at being noticed at all out there in the middle of an empty river that he took off his cap and waved it after us for a good 10 minutes, until we'd gone round the bend. The room laughs at this point, exactly where it always does, and I take my usual pause, wait a second of quiet before the next line. Then I say that our ship, I'll admit, is better mannered than the rules actually require. She greets everyone politely, even the ones we don't manage to spot from the bridge in time. A fishing boat by the bank, a barge train coming round the bend, a tug that's only just appeared in the distance. And here's where I usually drop the line that sticks with them best. So our ship is polite enough to say hello even where there's no one left to answer. I add another line to that, also tested over the years. The rules, I explain, turned into something like good manners for our captain a long time ago, the kind he was raised with, and he keeps to them even where nobody would ever check on him, out in the middle of the river, at night, in complete darkness, where there's nobody out there at all besides the two of us.
Only tonight, starting the line for the 100th time about there being no one left to answer, I stopped dead halfway through it. Because I remember I'm not saying it just for the laugh this time. Because a week ago, on this same route, on a night just as quiet, I was standing out on the bridge wing, and the watch officer beside me gave a short blast on the empty river, out of habit, just because there was a sharp bend ahead, and that's the rule. And a few seconds later, an answering signal came out of the dark. Not the same blast, not a repeat of ours, but a different one, short in its own way, and the watch officer said out loud, surprised, because the answer wasn't like anything a vessel gives back in an ordinary passing. As if something out there in the dark had heard us and wanted to answer properly, only it hadn't learned the rules yet and put the signal in the wrong place in the conversation, not where it belonged. Our radar was clear. Not a single mark on the river, either way. Not one light ahead. The watch officer raised his binoculars and saw nothing. No hull, not the smallest movement anywhere near where the sound seemed to come from. And that sound, I'll say this to anyone who asks, was entirely clear, separate, a signal in its own right. Nothing like the long trailing note that drifts back off the far bank if you hold a blast too long in still air. Someone in the room asks quietly at this point whether we really got an answer that night, whether it wasn't just our imagination, and I answer, briefly, that no, it wasn't imagined. The watch officer heard exactly what I heard, and the two of us have remembered that sound the same way ever since. The room goes quiet at this point, because my voice changes. I can hear it happening myself. The usual pauses for laughter just aren't there anymore, and someone at the back tables asks quietly, "And then, what happened then?" And then, this happened. 2 days later, on the return sailing, at almost the same stretch of river, we gave a short signal before the bend again, and an answering signal came again. Only this time, it was already correct, exactly the way a vessel is supposed to answer us under the passing rules, as if whatever was answering had spent those 2 days learning what it hadn't known before, and now placed the signal exactly where it belonged in the conversation, not a second early, not a second late. The watch officer looked at me then, I looked at him, both of us silent, and neither of us said out loud what we were both thinking. Whatever this was, it wasn't just answering us, it was learning to answer us properly. But that's not frightening. I always tell the passengers just that. Because in all my years on this route, nothing bad has ever come of it. Not a scratch on the hull, not one delay in the schedule. Only somehow, I can't get used to it myself. And now, telling the story for the 100th time, for the first time, I can't finish it as a joke. This morning, before breakfast even, I was going up to the bridge and heard the watch officer telling the next shift what had happened, quietly, and from the way he kept his eyes off the river while he said it, I understood that a third thing had happened, something I hadn't been told about yet. And now, standing in front of the room with a cup of cold tea in my hand, I'm saying it out loud for the first time, not as the story, but as what actually happened. Last night, we gave a short signal before that same bend. The usual way, nothing special about it, just because that's the rule. And the answering signal came before our own horn even sounded, a fraction of a second before, as if whoever was answering already knew we were about to give the signal and wanted to get its answer in early, ahead of a sound that hadn't even been born yet. The captain, hearing that, still turned the wheel the usual way, the ordinary, safe, routine maneuver every vessel uses to pass on that stretch of river. Because the rules are the rules, no matter who's on the other end of the signal. And a minute later, as we were coming round the bend, one more short signal came out of that same darkness. Exactly the one that's meant to close out a passing, polite,
and correct by the rules. As if something on the other side of the river had just finished the very same maneuver we had, in step and mirrored, though there was decidedly no one there to finish it. No light, no shape, not one mark on the instruments, which at that minute I checked with the watch officer specially, were working perfectly. The room stays quiet longer than it should after a story. Someone sets their cup down on the saucer far too carefully, as if afraid of the sound. And I understand I can't end tonight on the funny line about the polite ship, because the routine usually goes on from there with the joke that if an oncoming horn ever sounds too close for comfort, you just answer politely and pass on as you're meant to. And tonight, that joke won't form itself into a single word in my mouth. So I just say that the evening's getting on, that the tea's going cold, and that next sailing I'll tell them a different story about the time our ship spent a whole night aground on a sandbank next to a cow that had wandered onto it from the nearest meadow, and how the bosun spent 2 hours talking her back toward the fairway. I know that story by heart as well as the other one. It has its own pause for a laugh, and its own line about the stubborn cow who listened to the bosun more closely than some passengers listened to my evening story. And it always ends the same quiet way. The cow wanders off, the ship comes off the sandbank, everyone goes back to their cabins happy. It's a safe story. Nobody answers anybody out of the dark in it. And from this sailing on, that's the only one I'll tell in the lounge. The one I told tonight, I won't tell to anyone again. Not here, in the room, and not on the bridge, where I usually pass on to the watch everything worth knowing before shift. To the watch I said just one thing, short, no explanation. Don't answer a signal out of the dark anymore, however correct and polite it seems. Let the river pass us in silence if that's what it wants. The passengers drift off to their cabins gradually. Someone still lingers by the window, looking out at the dark water where nothing can be seen, and where I now try not to look for too long myself, though the work makes me do it anyway. Every night on this stretch we pass the same bend, and the helmsman still has to give a short signal because the rules are the rules, and no story told over tea cancels a schedule. I stand by the door out of the lounge, hold it open for the last of the guests, wish each one good night in turn, in the same level voice I've used for 5 years running after every story. And already out in the corridor, I hear the steward behind me clearing the empty tea glasses off the tables, and up on the top deck, where the next watch is on duty now, there's the same silence that lies over the river every night on this route, level, undisturbed, as if nothing had been told tonight at all. Only now, pulling the lounge door shut behind me, I listen for a second to the quiet beyond the rail, out where the river passes us in the dark by its own impeccably polite rules, and wait to find out whether there's anyone there to answer it tonight. The crew deck of a big liner doesn't begin with a gangway or a watch rota. It begins with this very passage by the laundry, so narrow that 2 linen trolleys can't pass each other in it. And all day long, whatever's happening up above among the passengers, the dryers hum away steadily down here, one after another, without stopping, as if the deck itself breathed through them. I came here off a river steamer where I'd worked for years, knew every watch by heart, and could tell what had gone wrong in the engine room just by the sound of the motor through the bulkhead. But here, on my very first sea contract, taken on as general labor in housekeeping, I don't understand a single word of what's spoken around me from morning till night. The crew's drawn from all over the world, every one of them with a language of their own. but among themselves they all speak one common tongue, the one language I alone don't know. And there's talk going on around me the whole time, out of which I can't take a single meaning, only the tone, only who's raising their voice at whom and who's laughing. In the mornings, when the changeover's only just beginning, the corridor by the laundry is at its most packed. Trolleys knock against each other's sides, someone squeezes past sideways with a sack over their shoulder, and the whole flow moves past me so smoothly, it's as if it has a shared rhythm I can't hear either. I only see it in the way the backs in uniform part and close together again.
The work itself is simple, understood without any translation. Push the trolley wherever the supervisor points, collect sacks where a finger's pointed at them, sort by the color of a tag I was shown once and never shown again, because I got it the first time. Gestures do the whole job of a dictionary here. A nod means take it. A flat palm means wait. 2 fingers toward the lift mean carry it up. And by the middle of the voyage, I'd settled into it well enough. Learned to read the shape of the day from the movement of hands, from who's heading where with a trolley, and in what order the lights go out in the laundry before a changeover. There are always plenty of voices around me, running along in the background like the hum of the dryers, louder, then quieter, sometimes with laughter, sometimes dry and short. And I stopped trying long ago to pull a single word out of that flow, because there's exactly as much meaning in it as there is in the hum of the machines through the wall. I heard it for the first time right here in the laundry on one of my first days, from a woman who was standing at the feed end of a tumble dryer. She caught my eye as I hauled a trolley past her and said 4 short words to me, evenly, calmly, with no question in her voice, the way you'd say something ordinary to a person you've already seen more than once. Nara batu sing oli. I nodded back, the way I nodded at everything I didn't understand, and she smiled and turned back to her drum, as if the conversation had ended exactly the way it was meant to. I didn't think much of it at the time. Who knows what words get said to someone who drifts past you day after day with a laundry trolley, and I decided I'd simply learn a few more phrases like it over time, the same way I'd already learned the gestures, and gradually stop being the one person who understood nothing at all around him. Sometime later, they moved me onto a different shift, the night one, when a completely different set of people works the laundry. And to avoid sitting idle through the unfamiliar hours, I started going into the crew mess earlier than before, while it was still nearly empty and the cook was only just laying food out into trays for those coming on first. He looked at me too when I picked up a tray and said exactly the same 4 words in the same order with the same intonation the woman in the laundry had used. Nada batu sing oli, letter for letter the same, as if the 2 of them had learned the same phrase for the same person, even though I know for a fact the 2 of them don't even work in the same part of the ship and probably never even see each other. I'd changed shift on purpose to see whether anything around me would change, and one thing had changed completely. Everything from the people to the hours. Yet the phrase reached me unchanged, word for word, as if it had been waiting for me in the new place, just as patiently as it had waited in the old one. So I started changing my route round the ship on purpose, going down service stairways I didn't normally use, giving the laundry a wide berth whenever I could, taking the goods lift instead of the usual corridor, anything to avoid passing the same faces one more time. And it was in the lift that a lad from the lower deck caught up with me, someone I'd genuinely never seen before. He held the door for my trolley, and while the lift crawled up between decks, he said the same 4 words to me, in exactly the same voice everyone else used for them. Nara batu singoli, without a single letter out of place, as if that intonation didn't belong to any one person,
but simply traveled along with the words from one to the next. I stood there in the cramped lift car, listening to the hoist motor, which sounds nothing like the engines back home on the river, and thought only about how completely I'd changed my route, and how the phrase had found me anyway, as if it had never really been about where I walked. I tried changing my sleeping hours too, lying down in snatches wherever I could, ignoring any kind of shift schedule, anything to break up whatever pattern I thought the phrase might be following to reach me.
One day, I dozed off right by a gangway, leaning against the bulkhead in a gap between tasks, and what woke me wasn't a nudge or a call. It was the phrase itself, Nara Batu Seng Oli, said by someone who happened to be coming up the gangway toward the new shift at that moment. I didn't even manage to get a proper look at their face, only heard the words, level and calm, addressed straight at me, and felt myself waking to the sound before I felt any touch. I shifted my sleeping hour this way and that, snatched it before midnight one time, near dawn another, tried not sleeping at all in my free hours, and none of it made the slightest difference to how often the phrase reached me. It kept coming, exactly as often as before, no less, no more, as if the time of day meant nothing to it at all. Last of all, I even asked to be moved from my team to another one, to work galley support instead of housekeeping. Anything to end up among people I hadn't crossed paths with at all in the whole voyage. There, at the entrance to a laundry that was new to me, on a different deck, where I'd gone for the first time to collect fresh linen, I was met by a man I'd never seen before, and without so much as looking up from his trolley, he said the same words to me, Nara Batu Sengoli, in the same order, with the same level intonation, as if he'd inherited it from everyone who'd said it to me before him. That was when I understood, once and for all, that I could change anything I liked. Team, deck, route round the ship, sleeping hours, and the phrase would still come back exactly the same, not one shade different, no louder, no quieter, no more often and no less. And it would never once be said to my back if I turned round and walked away without looking behind me. I tried, once, to write the words down as I heard them. One evening in a free hour, took a scrap of paper and repeated them under my breath until I'd got something close to it down on the page. But reading it back the next day, I realized I couldn't even be certain which letter it started with, because my memory kept offering me first one version of the sound and then another, the stresses landing slightly differently each time, as if the sounds themselves refused to settle on paper the way they settled in the ear. There was no one to ask, and nothing to ask with. The languages around me stayed closed doors, and the one language shared by the whole crew I never properly learned in the whole voyage. I picked up only the handful of words needed for work, and it was certainly no use for asking anyone what those 4 words meant, the ones that different people kept saying to me, looking straight at my face. I tried repeating them to myself in my free hours, lying in the dark of my cabin, until the sound started seeming, by turns, more familiar, and then, just as often, further away and stranger than it had been at first. And at some point, I understood that repeating it made the phrase no clearer and no more familiar. It simply stayed exactly the same sound it had been the first time when I heard it from the woman at the dryer. I gave up on the idea of writing it down fairly quickly, and decided that since the phrase kept arriving unchanged, whatever else was going on around me, there was no need for me to work out what it meant. It was enough that it existed at all and held its shape more firmly than anything else on this ship. By the end of the contract, it had happened on its own. That I was the one saying the phrase first now. Walking into the laundry with a trolley I no longer wait to be spoken to. I say the 4 words myself, Nara Batu Seng Oli, in exactly the same order and the same intonation,
the woman at the dryer once used with me. And whoever's standing by the machines at that moment answers me with the same words back. The same thing happens now at the gangway, too, when I meet the new shift coming toward me as mine ends. I speak first, before anyone else has a chance to open their mouth, and hear the familiar words back, said to me, level, calm, with no surprise in the voice at all. I still don't know what exactly I'm saying each time, walking into that narrow passage by the laundry, or standing at the gangway waiting for someone else's shift. And I've stopped deliberately trying to find out. I don't hunt for matching sounds. I don't go looking in my free hours for anyone who could explain even one of those 4 sounds to me in my own language. I simply say them the way I learned them by ear this voyage. Level, calm, looking a person in the face, and wait for the same expression I once had turned on me. No question in it. Just the look you give one of your own. Someone who's finally started speaking the language shared by everyone, even if all he knows of it is 4 words. This is my 3rd contract as a motorman on this line, and the routine of a watch is so worn into me by now, I could walk it with my eyes shut. Turn out, do the rounds of the diesels, log the readings, do the rounds again, round and round like that until you hand the watch to your relief and go up a couple of decks to the crew's living quarters. We work deep down, right in the belly of the ship, somewhere a passenger never goes and never even suspects there's anything down there worth looking at. Open graded ladders link one platform to the next. The metal under your boots hums with the machinery, and the light everywhere is the same flat, workaday yellow. Not a single window to the outside. Upward to where the passengers walk, we've got no way in at all. They've got their own uniform, their own lift, their own door that only opens to a card of a particular color, and any engine rating who tries to wander up there without a reason gets turned back fast and without a word of explanation. We're not sore about how it's arranged. That's how every ship of this class is built. Everyone's simply got their own story of existence. And over 3 contracts, I've grown so used to mine that I'd all but stopped thinking about what goes on above me during a watch, until I started keeping a deliberate eye on one place down below, from where something up there can still be made out. The one such place is the ventilation trunk between the engine room and the open deck. A narrow shaft with graded platforms and ladders that runs vertically through several levels of the ship and finishes right at the top at a grill set into the deck planking close by the rail. Standing on the top platform of that shaft with your head tipped back, you can make out, far above, a pale rectangle. A scrap of deck seen through the grill, cut off on every side by the frame of the shaft itself. And in that rectangle, now and then, a figure flickers past the guardrail, someone's legs walking by, the edge of a deck chair, the shadow of a parasol. There's nothing more to be made out from down there. You never see a face. You can't make out a word. Only the plainest movements, the shapes of bodies, the direction someone's walking in. And I have to be honest and say that nearly everything I know about life on the decks above, I know from that patch of sky the size of a dinner tray. And the rest sometimes comes down to us on its own. A scrap of conversation caught by the ventilation, a crumpled paper napkin, a damp towel the wind blows straight through the grill down into the dark of the engine room. Sometimes it's just a nutshell. Sometimes a torn strip of paper streamer left over from boarding. And it's from these stray things that drift down that I build up my own picture of what a day looks like on the decks I'll never see whole. Only in edges, in scraps. In the little the grill lets through in either direction. The first time I noticed the draft in that shaft was right at the start of the contract, standing on the platform just under the grill with a rag in my hands. By every law of how a ship's built, the air in a shaft like that is meant to run up. The engine room pushes air out through the grill. The extraction pulls it away from us, up towards the sky, not back down onto us.
But that evening, the air ran down, and it ran down strong enough to whip the edge of the rag about in my hands, as though somewhere up there, on deck, a fan was running that pushed the deck air straight down the shaft at us, instead of the other way round. And I decided at the time it had to be some temporary fault, one I'd report to the ventilation engineer in the morning. The engineer just shrugged, said the gauges showed nothing wrong, the draft was within normal range, and that the readings on the board didn't match what I was describing to him in words. And since the instruments don't lie, chances were I'd simply got the direction wrong, standing facing the wrong way. I didn't argue, went back to my watch, and by the middle of that first contract, I started noticing things in that cropped scrap of deck up above that didn't strike me as strange at first. One passenger, clearing his own plate off a table, would carry it off himself towards the galley hatch. Another, passing a row of deck chairs, would straighten one that had slid out of line without breaking stride, set it flush with the rest without so much as looking round, as though it were pure habit, with no thought at all that this wasn't his job. The second motorman, the one I share watches with, comes up to the platform once a shift to check the gauges, tosses off a short, check the pressure, over his shoulder and heads straight back down, never once looking up. That rectangle has never held any interest for him, and I gave up telling him about it a long time ago, because all I ever get back is a shrug. By the middle of the voyage, the row of deck chairs on my patch of visible deck stood perfectly straight, as if to a chalk line, though I never once saw anyone from the crew in uniform doing it. The passengers themselves, passing by, would steady one chair or another, nudge it a fraction, line it toe-to-toe with its neighbor, and did it with the same calm, contented look they'd wear carrying their own drink back to a table. The guardrail wires along the side had started looking tauter, too, than on the first day. Someone kept taking up the slack, running the wire back through its ring, and once, in my rectangle, I made out a woman in a summer dress standing by the gangway long before the announced docking, holding the barrier chain aside to let a rating through with a trolley, not because anyone had asked her to, but simply because she'd happened to be nearest first and seemed, somehow, to know in advance a hand was needed there. By this time, the draft in the shaft had weakened noticeably since that first evening. The rag no longer whipped about in my hands. The air only just stirred its edge, level and faint, but it still ran down, not up. The direction hadn't changed once in all those weeks. Only the strength had. My relief looks in on the platform once more before handing over the watch, says a short, "Your watch," and heads back down to the diesels, never lingering a second longer than he has to. And I'm left alone at the grill again, with that weakening current on my face and a stranger slice of deck above my head. By the end of the voyage, if you'd asked me which figures in my rectangle were passengers and which were crew, I couldn't have told you just from how they behaved. Both alike cleared plates off tables, held doors open for one another, folded up blankets after a day in the sun and stacked them by the way off the deck. All of them with the same light, contented faces, not a trace of tiredness or complaint, as though the whole of it wasn't work to them at all, but part of the holiday itself, the same pleasure as a swim or a meal before sunset. Nobody asked them out loud. I'm as sure of that as anyone can be watching people through a grill from several decks away. And certainly nobody paid them. The voyage simply came to its middle and then to its end, and they became part of its workings themselves, gradually, without a single visible moment when it began, and honestly, I couldn't have named the day it happened. By this time, the current out of the shaft had grown so faint I stopped feeling it with the rag at all,
only with the bare skin of my hand held right up to the grill. The hairs on my forearm just stirred. It still ran down, not up, same as always, but almost none of the strength was left in it, as if something up there was slowly closing, not all the way, but noticeably, evening after evening. Once the second motorman did linger on the platform longer than usual, glanced up towards the grill above, asked only, "Did you see it?" and, without waiting for an answer, went back down to the diesels, as if the question had been a pure formality and not the start of a conversation he'd actually have liked to carry on. On the last evening of the contract, just before we put into the port where I was due to pay off, I went up to the platform under the grill for my usual shift and stood there longer than the check called for, simply to feel that current on my face one more time, and felt nothing at all. The air in the shaft didn't run up and didn't run down at all. It stood level, motionless, as if the whole system had stopped working all at once, though the diesels below were making exactly the same noise as ever, and not one of the engineers had reported any fault with the extraction in all those months. Of every evening of that contract, that last one turned out the hardest. Worse than any of the ones where the current was still there, even at its weakest. Because the absence of a draft where one is meant to be, by every law of how a ship's built, doesn't feel like silence. It feels like something that has ended rather than simply grown faint. And standing under that dead grill turned out heavier than standing under the strongest draft on the very first evening. The second motorman came up after me, stood beside me, held his palm to the grill too, said nothing about the air, only muttered, "Let's eat," and went first down towards the ladder, and I followed him without looking back once more at the rectangle of light above my head. I didn't renew the contract that time, though they offered to keep me on another 6 months with a rise and signed on a harbor tug instead, where there are no passengers at all, only crew and cargo. The work's harder than before, the pay's less, but I'm home a good deal more often now than in all 3 contracts on the line put together. There's no shaft with a view upward on a tug, no doors that only open to a card, none of that strange, storied arrangement of the world, where some walk the deck in light clothes and take up other people's work without being asked, while others watch gauges in the heat among the metal and see it all only through a grill the size of a dinner tray. I haven't signed on to a cruise ship since, though the offers have kept coming, and when people ask why, I answer simply that it's just not for me, and I don't explain any further, because putting it into words is as hard as explaining what it feels like against your palm at the grill of a ventilation shaft, when the air there runs the wrong way from what it should, and then stops running at all. The ventilation on a tug is simple, no shaft with platforms, just a grill set in a bulkhead with open water straight beyond it, and now and then I catch myself, out of habit, holding my palm up to it, checking the draft, though there's nothing there worth checking. The air goes where it's meant to, steady, with no story to it, and that's more than enough for me, for whatever years of service I've got left. The river at night is always the same, whatever the ones new to this route might tell you. The water goes flat and dark, the lights on the bank thin out. The boat holds steady, no rolling, only the engine trembling up through the deck below. You know that trembling better than most. You spent the last 2 days lying first by the boiler room, then here in the crew mess, where I'm on my own right now, if you can even call it that. I've worked this route a long time, longer than the watches change and the cooks change, and these voyages run long, days on end, and the vessel's tight for space. A 4-berth cabin, a corridor too narrow for 2 men to pass, a mess with one long table where people eat in turns, because everyone can't fit at once. And so, in all this tightness, I talk to you, because you're the only one I'm ever properly alone with here. You don't answer, and you don't ask questions. You just lie there beside me, and somehow that's enough. At night, the boat seems asleep, but really it never is. Up above, through the bulkhead, passengers snore away in their cabins. Down below, the engine hums steady. The officer on watch paces the wheelhouse. And along the corridors, the ones whose job it is at this hour keep passing back and forth. The engineer checking his gauges, the second mate doing his rounds of the deck with a torch, someone hauling a kettle from the galley for the morning shift. I've walked past all this more seasons than I can count now. I know every creak of this corridor by heart. I know which hour the pots rattle in the galley and which hour the watch changes on the bridge. And still, every time, here in the closeness where nothing's ever really out of sight, I find a minute just to sit with you and talk out loud. For myself, for no one else. Over the years I've worked this route, I've grown used to one thing I don't say out loud to people. Only to you. On this ship, I've never once managed to be alone in a room for longer than a little while. Doesn't matter if it's the cabin, the corridor late at night, or this mess at an hour when, by the timetable, no one should be here at all. The moment I'm left in a room with no one watching, the door opens before long, and in comes one of our own. The engineer after a tool he's forgotten, the cook after some seasoning, the officer on watch after a signature in the log, the ship's doctor after a box from the medicine cabinet, the second mate to check the schedule of stopovers pinned right there by the entrance. Always with a reason, always ordinary, always from the direction a man with that reason ought to come from. And never once has it been a stranger. No one who isn't on the crew list. I stopped being surprised by it a long time ago and stopped waiting for it to go differently one day. I just know that my being alone on this route lasts exactly until someone remembers they need to be here too. And now, while I'm saying all this, you get up from your spot by the bowl and move in closer to me. But you don't settle by my feet or up on the bench beside me. You sit right down on the floor between me and the door, exactly on the line anyone's bound to come through. It took me a while to notice, a few voyages in, that you always pick this same spot, wherever the two of us happen to be. Not the warm corner, not my lap. That one exact point in the room where nobody can come in without passing you first. You've got your own warm corner, of course, by the boiler room, where the bulkhead's always a little hot to the touch, and that's where you go to sleep when no one needs you. But when you come here, to the mess or the cabin, it's not for the warmth. I worked that out long ago, because there's no shortage of warm spots on this ship that have nothing to do with me. Sometimes I joke that you must know in advance who's coming and when, and time it just right to take the spot where you'll see the door first. But of course, that's only a joke. There's no way for a cat to know a thing like that. You just sit where it suits you, and it just so happens that what suits you is always the same. You belong to this ship, really. You were taken on as crew long before I came aboard, and the whole crew feeds you in turns. Whoever passes the galley tosses you a scrap. So you're fed and lazy, and you've got no need to go looking for company just for a meal. You sleep where you like, you go where you like. And the fact that you choose to sit beside me at this particular hour feels to me like almost the only thing on this ship where everything's shared with everyone that belongs to just the two of us. Night before last, when I came here for a mug of tea and there was no one else about, you followed almost straight after and sat down exactly the same way, between the stool I'd taken and the door to the corridor. And before long, same as always, in came the stewardess. She'd run out of salt in the little shaker in the galley, it turned out, and she remembered seeing a spare one here. She stepped right over you. You didn't so much as think about moving out of the way, just tucked your tail in a little, and she wasn't even surprised. She's used to it by now, you always settling exactly where people walk. Over time, I started noticing the spot getting more exact, time after time. Each time you sit a little closer to that same line between me and the door, as if someone had chalked it out on the floor and told you to keep to it exactly, not a hand's width either side. In the cramped 4-berth cabin, where I sleep alongside 3 other men and one of them's always snoring, I sleep somehow sounder and easier than I would in an empty single. I can't quite explain it myself. It's just that a tight, crowded place puts me to sleep more surely than an open one ever does. Once, I remember, it was in the corridor outside my cabin. You sat differently. Not between me and the door, but behind my back, facing the door, as if you'd suddenly decided to keep watch from the other side. And I'll admit, I froze for a few seconds before I could move again. It felt strange having you behind me, not where I'd got used to finding you. The door never did open that time. No one came in. And before long, you got up, walked round me, and lay back down on the old line between me and the door, as if you'd never changed a thing. I'm not the only one who's noticed. One time, the engineer came in after an adjustable wrench that's forever wandering off round the ship, and nearly stepped on you in the doorway, and stepping back, said, laughing, that my cat always sits exactly where people need to walk, as if he'd made it his job to guard the threshold. I said nothing at the time, though I could have told him you guard that threshold a good deal more precisely than he thinks. Not right at the door, and not in the middle of the room, but exactly between the spot where I'm sitting and the direction people come in from. Over all these voyages I've tried, I think, every room on the ship where a man might find some quiet. The wheelhouse at an odd hour, the engine room when it's empty, even the tarpaulin store, the radio room in the quiet stretch between transmissions, the laundry where the machine sits silent at night. The kind of places you'd think no one ever looks into at all. Every time it's the same. A short stretch of real quiet, then footsteps from the direction they ought to come from, and a man with a genuine reason to be there. Ordinary, everyday, the real thing, the very reason he'd come for. I gave up testing it on purpose long ago, going round the ship hunting for an empty room, because the result's always the same. But the habit of you sitting beside me wherever I settle, that stayed with me since the very first day of this route. At the last stopover, the first mate called me in and told me a single cabin had come free, closer to the middle deck. I'd been owed one for a long time by seniority, and I could move in that very day if I liked. I thanked him, went to have a look. An ordinary cabin, clean, quiet, its own wash basin, and stood there a while with the door shut, about as long as my quiet usually lasts on this ship, and wouldn't you know it, no one came in. Not once in all that time did the door open, and there was something so unfamiliar in that silence that it unsettled me far more than any creaking floorboard ever had. I turned it down that same day, told the first mate I was happy enough in the 4-berth cabin, that I was used to it, and he just shrugged and never asked again. My bed in the 4-berth cabin stayed mine. I went back that same evening, and that same night, I moved you over from your corner by the boiler room, folded an old blanket down by my feet, and made you something like a bed there, so you'd have somewhere to lie if you decided to stay till morning. My cabin mates teased me for it at first, asked why I'd bother when I'd had my own quiet cabin, and no one would have said a word if I'd stayed there the whole voyage. and all I ever answer is that I'm used to it, and I don't explain any further, because I could never explain it in words they'd accept anyway. One of the four snores every night. One of them tosses and turns. One of them gets up at the most awkward hour. And still I sleep sounder here than I would in the quiet of that single cabin, where no one would ever open the door.
Right now, while I'm telling you all this, you're lying beside me, and I'm finishing my tea and thinking that someone will come in here soon enough anyway, same as they always do, with some ordinary bit of business, and we'll just shift over, let them by, and be alone together again for a while, until the next one comes. Time to turn in. My watch is early, and this route's a long one. It runs on for days yet, further up the river, and if I'm honest, I stopped asking myself long ago why it's so easy to fall asleep exactly when you're near me. The river outside runs on the same as ever, dark and steady, and somewhere ahead, many days' travel from here, it has an end. But there's no need to think about that now. Right now, there's only this mess, this tea going cold, and you beside me, quiet and fed, the way you always are at this hour. Watch taken over. The stand by the gangway is in the same spot it stood on last trip and the one before, and the logbook in its canvas folder is lying where my relief always leaves it, open to today's date, and I set my pencil down beside it, and the fountain pen I use for the fair copy, and I listen to the port call already starting beyond the hull, the gangways being run out, a line slapping against the rail, and further off, past the quay, a town is starting up that I can't see yet, only hear through the hull, a steady, low hum, as if somewhere behind the ship's plating, someone's left a window ajar into a room where the television's always on. I've been standing here more seasons than one, and I'm used to the fact that watch at the gangway is dull, repetitive work. Check the gangway, log the times of departure and arrival, note who's gone ashore and who's come back, hold the canopy steady if it's windy, give a hand to a passenger whose feet slide on the wet planking, and for the rest of the time, just stand and watch people go down past you, onto the shore, while you stay up here, at the entrance, because your job's up here, not down there. My relief, still a young lad, goes down the gangway first. In a hurry, he's got things to do in town during the call, tells me over his shoulder he'll be back for departure, and I nod, because that's how it's been between us since the start of the summer. He goes ashore at the calls, I stand at the gangway, and nobody ever decided it that way on purpose. It's just how the roster turned out, and the roster's drawn up by entirely different people. Somebody in an office, long before the trip, laying out the whole season's watches in a grid all at once. I watch him go until his figure disappears round the corner of a warehouse, and turn back to the folder, to the stand, to the same view of the quay that I'll have now right through to departure. The view changes town to town only in the details, and stays, underneath, exactly the same. The water's edge, a crane on the far pier, the road along the embankment where people walk toward the town, and none of them walk back toward the gangway because it's too early yet to come back. I log the time the gangway opened, note that the first passengers are already going down in 2s and 3s, hold the canopy steady at the top of the gangway so it doesn't flap in the wind, and for that whole hour before departure, the same sight passes in front of me. People heading off, empty-handed or loaded with shopping, cheerful or lost in thought, and I nod to everyone who goes past, ask now and then whether they've remembered their pass, and that, on the whole, is the whole of my part in it. Standing and watching with my eyes the ones who are able to go down to where I don't go myself. Port call. I log the ship's time of arrival in port, the time the gangway opened, note briefly that passengers are going ashore in an orderly way, no incidents, and that's where the official part ends.
And after that, I just stand by the gangway and look at the town that starts right past the quay wall. Low houses, trees along the embankment, a bell tower somewhere further off that I won't be walking to today. Same as always. In all the years I've worked this line, it's never once happened that my watch didn't line up with a port call. I stopped calling it a coincidence, in the ordinary sense of the word, a long while ago. I've just noticed it keeps coming out that way, and I won't try to explain to myself why exactly, because I don't need the explanation. The roster's drawn up by people, not by anything else. It's just that the roster they end up with is the kind where I'm almost never the one who gets to go ashore. One of the younger deckhands asked me outright once whether it doesn't bother me, it working out that way trip after trip, and I told him honestly that I don't think about it in those terms. A roster isn't a person. Being offended by it would be as strange as being offended by the current of a river, and I've got no grounds to blame the people who draw it up, because each one of them, taken on their own, is right in their own small decision. It's just that by the end of summer there's a great many of those decisions, and somehow they all end up facing the same direction. Passengers come back for departure without hurrying, some with bags, some empty-handed, and I help an elderly woman up whose heel skids on the gangway, note the time of the last one aboard, close the page with a short entry that we're ready to sail, and the whole time the town behind me carries on with its evening life, which, as usual, I've got no part of any closer than the length of the gangway.
Watch handed over.
My relief got back for departure, as promised, flushed from walking, still not quite catching his breath, and asks me straight off whether I'd like to swap places next time. He'll stand at the gangway and I'll go ashore instead, see the bell tower up close. I say I'll think about it, though I already know nothing will come of it, because tomorrow he'll have a short spell of shore leave of his own before the next trip, and the day after he'll remember he owes me one from the time before, when I covered for him during unloading, and something won't line up again, the way it hasn't lined up plenty of times already this summer. Not out of any ill will, everyone's just got their own business to attend to, and my watch, for some reason, always lands where there's no one to go ashore but me. Watch taken over. A new town beyond the rail. I've never really looked at it closely before, only ever from a distance, from the water, as the ship came into the quay. And now, standing at the gangway, I hear a tram ringing somewhere beyond the port, and a little after that, a scrap of music drifting out of some open window, and then someone's laughter, and then, not far off at all, a dog barking, and I catch myself thinking that this same order of sounds, tram, music, laughter, dog, I've heard, or so it seems, quite recently, in another town, many rivers and bends of the line away from here, and it's less a memory in the ordinary sense than a kind of recognition. It arrives on its own, without any effort to remember, simply from how the sound settles in the ear. Departure. The gangways stowed, the boarding steps raised, the town beyond the rail already sliding away into the distance along with the quay, and I log the time of departure. Nothing out of the ordinary happened this call, apart from that minute of recognition at the gangway, which of course I don't write a line about in the log, because there's nothing to write there. It's not an incident, and it's not a delay to the sailing, just a feeling. And there are plenty of different ones like it over a long watch. And most of them are forgotten again by the next town. Port call. Midsummer now. I lost count long ago of the towns I've stood at the gangway in this season, and in every one of them the shore sounds the same to me. A tram, music from someone's open window, laughter, a dog. Not sounds that differ from town to town the way they really ought to, but the same order of sounds, played over again, as if somewhere behind the quay wall it's always the same town, and only the fronts of the houses I see from the gangway ever change. My relief goes ashore early this time. He's got a meeting with relatives somewhere in the lanes behind the port, and I'm left alone at the gangway again, listening to a sound of other people's lives that I now know to the last note. And I realize I've stopped even trying to guess from it which town this is. The tram always comes at the same interval. The music always cuts off on the same note. The dog always barks the same number of times. And the difference between the towns, which used to register at least a little to the ear, has now worn away almost completely. Watch handed over. This time, I'm the one who offers to swap with my relief. Tell him straight out that I'd like to go ashore for once, walk down that street from the inside, the one the music keeps drifting out of, instead of the usual view of it from up at the gangway. And he hesitates, says he'd be glad to, only it'd feel wrong. He already owes me from the times before, and if you took my watch on top of that, it'd look as if he were the one calling the shots over me, not the roster. I don't push it, because I can see it isn't ill will or meanness at work. It's just that everyone carries their own arithmetic of debt that they don't want to break. And in that arithmetic, I somehow keep ending up, over and over. The one who stays at the gangway while the other one goes down. Watch taken over. Toward the end of the season, I can no longer make out anything at all in the sound that comes off the shore through the open rail. Tram, music, laughter, dog, arriving in the same order in every new town, without a single slip, without a single extra note. And I've stopped trying to guess where I am now. I just stand at the gangway and listen to a town that stopped being different towns for me a long time ago and turned into one long repeating sound, stretched out over the whole summer. My relief stays ashore longer than usual this time. I stand alone at the gangway for almost the whole call, look out at the empty quay and think that in the whole season I never once went ashore. Nobody held me back by force. It was simply other people's business, their days off and their debts, that nobody ever specifically arranged, working out that way every time, and the roster, over and over, brought me to the gangway exactly when the ship was standing at the shore. Watch handed over. Season's navigation closed. On the last evening of the season, with the logbook for this run almost finished and only the final columns left to fill, I take a ruler and a pencil and rule in one more column on the form, one that was never there in the printed layout to begin with. I label it at the top, short, shore leave taken, and then I go down the page in pencil through every entry I made all summer, and in every line of that new column I draw a straight dash, one after another, town after town, call after call. Nobody asks me why I did it. The duty officer takes the log without looking past the first page, makes no remarks, signs it, and puts the folder away in the cupboard with the other watch logs. And that same evening, I put in my papers to sign off the ship for the winter. And when the season ends for good, I don't go out on the next one. Someone else meets the gangway at the next call, in the next season, and now I only hear the town from the embankment, from below, standing with both feet on that ground I never once went down onto through the whole of last summer, and the sound around me is still exactly the same. A tram, music from an open window, laughter, a dog. Only now I'm standing close enough finally to make out something of my own in it.